Alright, y'all, so I'm going to be walking you guys through today how to put together your foundations in SketchUp for your tiny homes. I'm going to go through a couple of the ones that are a little bit more tricky and that you'll probably see. That would be a Pier Foundation and a full wall foundation. So I'll go ahead and start with the Pier Foundation. And with both of these, I'm going to go ahead and draw out just my footprint. And I'm going to choose a footprint that's a little bit more difficult than just a simple rectangle. If you're doing just a simple rectangle, that's going to make it a little bit easier. But I'm going to say it's 16 feet by 8 feet, and back down 8 feet, back over 8 feet, back down, then that remaining 8 feet, grab on that point there, and there you go. And there's my kind of footprint that I'm going to be working with, that you can see. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a component. I'm just going to call this my footprint. And just about everything that you're making, you're going to want to make a component. That'll make it so that it's far more easy to make adjustments, to move it without affecting the other parts of your building. I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this I'll do one of these as a pier foundation and one as a full floor. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy by grabbing this move tool. And I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit the control key. And that allows me to make a copy. So now I have a copy there. But one thing of note is if I go into this component now, since it is a component, and let's say I'm just going to make some markups so we can kind of see, right? It changes both of these. So if I don't want that to happen, right, what I can do is I can click on this and right-click and say Make Unique. And now if I go in here by double-clicking and delete that, it doesn't change what I did on the other one. So now they're two totally unique components. But they're each kind of separate things. So that's something that you're going to want to keep in mind as you do this. So like I said, this first one I'm going to go ahead and make a pier foundation. Now you could use square piers, you could use circular piers. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use circular piers because I think that's going to provide a kind of nice look for what I'm wanting to do. Maybe I'm going to use some big old cedar logs for this. And one thing that you'll notice is if I grab my circle tool here to draw a circle, and I'll actually get outside of this component. So I'm drawing it not in the component, so I'm not editing that component, I'm drawing this on top, right? If I make, let's say a radius, so let's say I want it to be 10 inches across, so a 5-inch radius, right? That's what a 5-inch radius circle looks like. Now keeping in mind here that our beams are going to be coming to the end of this, right? So there's going to be all of this that's hanging out over the edge of our building. Now if you look at an actual house, typically you don't have all this hanging out over the edge, you have a significantly smaller amount. So what I'm probably going to want to have is I'm going to want to have this moved in a little bit. And in order to do that, I'm going to double click on this component, and then down here under the extrude tool, the push pull, I can click on that, and there's this, which is offset. So I can actually offset this face, right, that whole line, by a little bit. So let's say I want an offset to kind of get that circle. Circle has a radius of 5. So let's say I want an offset of about 3 inches, right? And then if I go back out and I select my circle here, I can move this so the center of my circle is now on that corner, and you'll see how that gives me just a nice kind of a better kind of fit on where these beams are actually going, so my circle doesn't stick out all the way. So that's not a totally necessary step, but it's something that I recommend doing. So let's say this first foundation I'm going to go to my extrude tool. Let's say I want my piers to be, let's just go with 2 feet, right, 2 foot piers. So let's say they extend down into the soil a little ways, but I only want them 2 feet there. All right, so there you go. Now I have my pier. Now as I mentioned, what I'm going to want to do is make that a component. So I'm going to triple click so everything is selected about it. I'm going to make it a component. I'm going to call this my pier. Right. And I had already had one that was called pier, and this is in this earlier that I deleted, so I just replaced that. So now I'm going to want these, and you typically want your pier foundations, if you're doing that, somewhere between every 6 and every 8 feet. You can go up towards like 10. You can certainly do less, and you can do 4. That's definitely not a problem, but somewhere between 6 and 8. Now, because of the dimensions of my building and my design, I know that this is 8 feet, 8 feet, 8 feet, 8 feet. I'm going to go with 8 foot, right, spacings here. So one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and double click into my component. I'm going to make some marks as to where those 8 feet marks are so that I can actually go to them as I'm building this. So now I have those marked out where those 8 feet are. You could also, go to a corner and measure down and type in, right? If you're kind of snapped along that edge, you can type in 8 feet, right? And you want to be snapped along that edge. If you're snapped in the right plane, then it'll move that distance. But I could just type in 8 feet and it'd get me to right there as well. Okay. So now that I have that marked up, I can go out here. By the way, I really like using the center click button on my mouse to pan and do this in orbit. You can also do the shortcut key is O. If you type in O, that'll get you to the orbit. So I'm going to go to the bottom here and select this guy. And once again, just using my move tool, right, I'm going to go ahead and copy it. So click on it and hit Control. And I'm just going to move it to all these joints, right? Once again, the Control and move it there. Now another way to do this is if I go over to my components on this side, right, I can go to my components that are in the model, and I can actually go ahead and grab my pier, right, and I could go ahead and place that. Now the thing with this is that it doesn't necessarily snap to the center, so then to move it to the right spot I've got to kind of snap to the center, and then I can move it to where I want it to be. So a few different ways to do that. But you go ahead and get all your piers in there. I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. And there we go. So I've got all my piers lined up and they're good to go. One thing of note that you'll notice just kind of with this is that these guys are not all in alignment, right? So that's something that I might want to consider in terms of my design, right? Is would I want to move this guy over a little bit so that it is in alignment with those other two, right? And that's a design consideration that we can get to when we come to the floor, right? But in the meanwhile, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and do this other foundation, right, which would be the full wall. This one, at least in SketchUp, is a little bit easier to go through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this component here, my footprint, and I'm going to go once again go ahead and do this offset tool, right? And let's say that I want a Control Z. Let's say that I want a 6-inch thick wall. I can go ahead and type in 6, and that'll give me my 6-inch dimension there. So I can go ahead and delete that central part. And one thing that you'll typically see is, once again, the spans on the floor, right? This is 16 feet. Typically, you won't have a floor beam spanning that great of a distance. And so what I'm probably going to want to do is I'm probably going to want to put a support beam in here as well, right? And one option, I could just do that using like a wooden beam later on, right? But another option would be to actually make this a part of my foundation. Right, in which case I'd draw a line from there to there, and a line from there to there, and then I can actually delete out these pieces that I don't need, those lines, and then now I actually have the whole part set up, and then I can extrude that. There we go. I can extrude that, let's say up, let's say just 1 foot. There we go, right? So there's that foundation. So there are the two types of foundations that we might end up having. Once again, depending on kind of the soil type that you have, depending on the cost, right? This one, the full floor, is going to be more expensive than the beams. So things to kind of keep in mind with that, but you're fine to use either one. So we've got our foundation in place. So now we're going to go ahead and do the floors, right? And with the floors, the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get the rim joists set up. And those are the ones that go around the outside. Just looking at this, right, the rim joists are going to go around the outside, and then the main flooring joists are going to span the distances in between there. Right, the same over here. The main flooring joists are going to span these distances across, right? So maybe I'll go ahead and start with this one here. This one's a little bit easier. So with a full wall, right, my beams around the outside don't need to be as thick. If I had not done this as a part of my foundation, right, then I would have had to have a thicker beam across here, right? A little bit wider, a little bit taller, possibly, so that it could actually support that span and the floors that are attached to that span. Since I don't have that, it's going to be a little bit easier. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a 2x8, right, all around my outside here. And then I'm going to use a 2x6s, right, because I'm spanning 8 feet here and here. And if you recall in our notes, if you're spanning about 8 feet, you're going to look for a 2x6 on your floor joists. And that comes from the joist spanning tables. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in a 2x8 by 16. Now, typically, you wouldn't necessarily see 2x8 by 16 as a standard length of lumber. But for this project, I'm not necessarily worried about that. You could always kind of stitch pieces of wood together when they're on a foundation like this. But if I was trying to span something like this here, then that would be important to keep in note. Right? So typically, you'll see 12 feet as the kind of maximal length that you'd end up with. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in a 2x8 using the, there it is, the box, right? And let's say I want to start with this one first, so I'm going to go ahead and click. And one of the nice things you can do is you can use the arrow keys, right, to constrain it to the axis you want. So if I want it going this way, into the going along this wall here, right, I want it on this plane. So, and I want this to be 2, by 8, right? And there's my 2x8 face, right? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and push and pull down. I know the length of this happens to be 16 feet, so I'm going to push it 16 feet. And there is that piece right there. Now once again, this is a component. I'm going to make this also a separate component, right? And it's going to be my 2x8 by 16, right? Just kind of naming them what they are. And then I can go ahead and move that by snapping to this corner and snap right there onto that corner as well. Right, so there's that piece of my foundation. Now I'm going to do the same along this wall here, right? I can either make another one by going through the same process, or what I can do is I can go ahead and copy this one, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control and move and make a copy, and I'm going to need to rotate this. The rotate tool is here by the move tool, right? I'm going to select a point, right? Make sure it's on the flat. I can use the arrow keys always to do that. And I'm going to go from there, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Boom. Right, so now I can take this and move it. Hotkey is M. So I can use the M key to move it. And I'm just going to move it to where it's abutting there. Right, and then these would be nailed together at that point. Now you'll notice it's extending a little bit too long. Right. And that's because this is 16, but it's extending the width of this board, which is 2 inches. Now, we're going to say, just for this, we're going to use the kind of rough cut dimensions. In reality, a 2x is actually only 1.5 inches wide, but I'm not necessarily worried about doing that with y'all because it's going to make things just that much more complicated. So we're just going to use kind of rough cut lumber and those rough cut numbers. So I'm actually going to right click on this and say make it unique so I don't edit both of these. And then I'm going to push pull, and I'm going to push it back. Oh, I need to go into it. So double click into it, and then I'm going to go back actually 4 inches so that I can fit my other board on there as well, right? So there we go. So now I'm going to make another copy of this. Hit Control to make that copy. Snap that to the outside. Once again, make unique. So I'm not editing them both. Double click in there, push pull all the way to the edge there, right? And that's the process that you're going to go through with all these on the rims. I'll go ahead and make this one. Now one thing I'm going to want to do is make sure I get this in the center. Now there should be a center point on that beam that I can snap to. What I'm going to do this time when I move is I'm going to select from the center point as my grab point for when I move. So I'm going to click the center, hit Control to make a copy. And I'm going to snap that then, hopefully this edge. Oh, that midpoint is not what I'm looking for. Alright, so I'm having a hard time kind of snapping to that point that I need. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to draw a line here. I'm just going to draw a line from there to there. Right. Now this line should have a midpoint now. Right. If I kind of select that line, it's got a midpoint, and I could actually draw that. Right. Draw the midpoint of that line. Oh, that's why it's off. Okay, so I need to get in between there. Okay. It's off because this is not directly in the center point. If I were to actually measure here, this span is going to be a little bit greater, or a little bit less, 7 feet 6 inches than this span, or a little bit greater. This span 7 feet, and 7 feet 6 inches. So this space is a little bit wider. So that's something to make note of. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that line, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw right on there. Oop. Draw from there to there, and then so now this has a midpoint then that I can reference for that. Oh, but that's going to be in the... No, that'll work. This is all a part of the process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy. I'm going to select this guy right there. Use move. I'm going to move from that point there. Hit Control. And I'm going to go ahead and insert that at that midpoint of that line. So now it looks, yes, now I am nice and centered on that. So this is where a lot of this process comes in. I'm going to go ahead and make it unique. I'm going to click into here, and then I can push and pull, right, this guy, push it to beyond this face, right, so that's the length, and the pushing and the pulling is constrained, which is nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same there, constrain it to that face. So there we go, there's that piece. Now one thing of note here is, once again, if we take a look at this, right, this is not necessarily great in that it's kind of hanging over the edge. So what I may want to do is actually take this whole thing and move it. Oops. See, this is what happens when you kind of try and move things within a component. So I'm going to take this whole component and I'm going to move it right there to the corner. Okay, and I like that a lot better. So I can go in here and tidy up and clear out that guy, which I don't need anymore. And it's all starting to come together, right? So now I just need a couple more pieces in here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this one. It's in the right angle. And I'm going to snag the outside piece, make unique, click in, grab this end face if it'll let me. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and click that to this face, right? So that's just nicely butting up against there. And then I can copy this guy. Let's get in the move, and this just allows me to control. I could insert it as a component. This just allows me to control exactly where it's going to go, and I want it to go right there. And we'll see, it looks like it's just a little bit too long, so I'm going to edit this guy. So that's at the right point there. I'll make sure it said that, oh, it's because I forgot to copy it. Oops. Oopsie daisies. So we're gonna move that back to there, try this one more time. Right. Control, because I forgot to copy it. There we go. And then I'm gonna go ahead, double click inside. And then push pull this face to there. Voila. And now I have my rim joists in. So now across here, spanning across here, I can have my floor joists, right, going across. So now we know that I want my floor joist 16 inches on center, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw a line across here, and I'm going to see what 16 inches on center actually gets me. So I'm going to go in this plane, and I'm going to go 16. And I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go 16. I'm going to go 16. And 16. I'm going to go the whole length. Right, and this is just finding out the spacing for those, right? So I'm going every 16 inches, and we'll see. Could also do some quick calculations. Right, I know that it should hopefully work out because it's a multiple of 4. So let's see where we shook out to. All right, so we just went end to end, right? So now I actually have my points on here, on this line, right? There are those line segments. So I can actually snap now to the ends of those lines, right, where I have marked out 16 inches. And once again, it's always useful here if you have multiples of 4. Sometimes it's not going to exactly line up, in which case you kind of want to move everything down to where everything is at least centered. But like I said, 16 inches on center is kind of a standard. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to have a, oh, forgot to make this one unique. Oopsies. That was my B. There we go. So now we're all good. Okay. So I could take one of these that's existing, or I could make a 2 by 6 by whatever this length is. Let's go ahead and take a measurement. What is that distance in between? Right, it appears to be, oops, between there and there. Oh, looks to be 7 feet 8 inches, right? So I need something at 7 feet 8 inches. So I'm going to make a rectangle. I'm going to constrain it to the plane that I want. I'm going to make it 2 by 6, right? And then I'm going to make it 7 feet 8 inches long, right? So 7 feet 8 inches. 7 feet 8 inches. There we go. Let's see if that actually worked. Did I get the right measurement done there, or did it just make it on its own? 7 feet 8 inches, so we are good to go. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this and I'm going to be putting this in there on those centers. So let's make this a component first. Once again, as always, don't forget to do that. And this is going to be my 2 by 6 by, we'll just call it 7 feet 8 inches. Okay, and then now, since I want them on centers, my grab point is actually going to be here, right? I'm just going to move that to that first endpoint. And that should be my 16 inches on center. And then I'm going to continue to do that. Now you can do a Control C and Control V, right? But you'll notice the grab point is not where I need it to be. So that's kind of the problem. So that's why I like doing it this way. There may be a shortcut if anyone's willing to dig and find it. You're more than welcome to. Yeah, that's right. So this is how we get our flooring all in there. And one more. Voila. All right, so that's that. So then we have the flooring. We just cover that with the subfloor, which would be plywood, which we can go over later. And that's, I think, about it for now. So I just do the same on this side. Right? I could either have them going this way, right, or this way. That's both 8 feet. Either one works. It's really not necessarily an advantage to either. And then the same, you'd go through the same process with here. The only difference here is that your rim joists would be a little bit wider. They'd probably be 4 by 8s, right, because of the spans that they're covering. And that's that. So yeah, hope this was helpful, and we'll carry this on with the next video.